It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
What actually happens here is that a name in some ways sends a signal to society about who you are and where you're from.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Now and then we record a podcast episode that makes me nervous. It makes me wonder, is this a good idea? Should we do this? Mrs. Happy Families, I'm not even going to introduce the topic yet. I just want to know, have we made a mistake before we even begin, or is this going to be okay?
Well, I hope not.
You hope not? What? You hope it's not going to be okay? Is that what you...
No, I hope that it's not a mistake.
Oh,
I hope that it's okay.
I'm really nervous about this one. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Justin. I'm here with Kylie, my wife, and mum to our 6 kids. I run happyfamilies.com.au. But before I tell you what the topic is, I want to let you know that there is science. There is science behind what we're going to talk about, and it's good science. And I also need to highlight that we're not doing this podcast to shame anyone. Kylie, we have the very, very, very best of intentions, correct?
Correct.
But we are going to laugh and make fun of people in spite of it. I can't believe that we're doing this. All right, so here it is. Just in the last few days, there's been a news article that has landed on news.com.au, Australia's apparently number one news website, although most of the time I wonder if it is actually news on that website. Kylie, introduce us to the topic. I don't even know if
you're just passing the buck.
I'm throwing you under the bus totally.
You sure are.
I want to be associated only with the science side of this. I'm sure of it.
So the article is titled Australia's Most Bogan Baby Names for 2022.
Yeah, so what we're really going to do here is we're going to highlight that people are coming up with some names that we might consider unusual. Creative, yeah, creative's better than what I was going to say. Some creative baby names, and we're going to share some of them with you, and then talk about whether it's a good or a bad idea to give your kids names that end up on news.com.au.
You know, it's funny. I've been reading a book lately. It's actually off your bookcase called The End of Average by Todd Rose.
I love this book. It's one of my favourite books of all time.
And it's funny. We're talking about, these creative ways that parents strive to create individuality for their children.
Yep.
And it's almost like this desire to make sure that their child stands out, that they don't, kind of fall into what we would consider the average name.
So I'm going to speak personally here, and I hope it doesn't come back to bite me. I love my brother and his wife, and their 3 kids are just gorgeous. But Tim, my brother, who's a famous photographer, or he used to be at least, I don't know what he's doing with that anymore, but really well known for his photography, and he and Kesh are both really creative types. They love the process of creation. They're always thinking about being creative. And when it came to their kids' names, they wanted to give their kids names that were standout names, that were unique names. Now, they would never make a list of bogan baby names for 2022, but they're really unique.
My sister's done the same with her kids. They are really different names. And I remember each time she was pregnant and we'd kind of ask her what she was thinking for a name, she literally got to a point after baby number 2, I think, where she just said, I'm not telling you. She said, because once you meet the baby and I tell you what its name is, you'll love it anyway. But whenever it's just a blip in my belly and it's just a name on a page, she said, you're going to hate it. I just know you are. And she's been very deliberate. I've got other friends who've been very specific about using unisex names so that their children aren't identifiable as male or female based on their name.
Yeah. Really interesting. And here I thought that we were coming up with really great names for our kids. I mean, it was kind of hard to come up with 6 girls' names, but Chanel, we thought that was unusual, and there's not a lot of Chanels around. But I remember when
there's lots of channels, though.
When we got to daughter number 3, and I wanted to go kind of a little bit old school, and I remember we talked about it, and we both agreed that Ella Rose would be great, and there were hardly any Ellas around at the time. And now every grade level that she's been in, she's been with at least 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 other Ellas. Like, Ellas are everywhere. And all of our kids' names ended up being pretty middle of the road, pretty average, pretty standard girls' names. So now that we've prolonged the agony, if you've called your children any of the following names, we're not saying you're a bogan. We're not saying that you've done anything wrong. We're not shaming you. What we're doing is we're saying that news.com.au is shaming you. News.com.au has decided that they want to pick on you, and we're just reporting what was in the paper. We're just reporting what was in the news article. Kylie, why don't you kick us off? What were the girls, the best?
Oh, look, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to pronounce some of these names.
Go.
We've got Mavery, which is Mave plus Avery makes Mavery.
Huh. Yeah.
We've got Kior. I'm going to say Kior. It's supposed to be like Dior, as in Christian Dior. We've got Cardi.
Yeah, well, Cardi B, right? But that's short for Bacardi. Throw on a K for a bit of random spelling there, just because if you're going to go bogan, you've got to change the spelling up as well. What else have we got? Any other girls' names that really struck you?
Brexley,
like we're having Brexit. How do you spell Brexley? Is that B-R-E-C-K?
Brex.
Oh, it's got an X in it.
Leigh.
Oh, wow. Well, so I believe that the V or the Lee or the whatever sound is right in. So I also saw that there was Ivacy. The one that concerned me the most was the one that's been named after the vape brand, Juul, Juul. So originally a Dutch name, but Juul is now a vape brand, and I like that. That does sound kind of bogan, right? If you're gonna name it after a vape, is that going too far? What do you reckon?
Oh, look, I'm scrolling as we're talking.
I actually like that name, by the way, Juul, but just knowing that it's named after the vape brand kind of diminishes it in my.
Well, just spell it differently.
Yeah, like Juul Kilcher. You were meant for me, Juul. You know you remember the folk singer from way back.
I remember a few years ago when we were having babies at that point, and there was a trend to kind of use nature as inspiration for baby names, and we had a friend call their child River, and another one call their
Haven,
and another one called them Summer and Winter. We had an Autumn.
We know someone called Snow.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at this list, and they've definitely taken the next step because
yeah, they have. I like the way you said they've taken the next step.
There's Salmon.
Oh wow! Is that for a girl or a boy?
I don't know.
I don't know if I could call my child Salmon. Although sometimes my kids are so scrumptious I could eat them, but I don't think I'd call them Salmon. Here are my favourite boys' names. You ready? We've got Brave. There's Draxler, Draxler. Cashton, Knoxley. Knox as in Knox, Knoxley.
I actually like that name.
Do you? You're so bogan. I can't believe how bogan you are, Mrs. Happy Families. What about this one? Legend. So it's like legend, but the D is halfway through the word instead of at the end. Legend instead of legend. There's also the two that really got me going. Raw, ROAR, raw.
Can I ask your next one?
Yeah. What's the last one?
Zinc.
Yeah. Yep. Zinc. Let's call our kids Zinc. Anyway, we have now done the shaming thing. There is actually some science around having an unusual name and what that does to your child's chances of success in life. We're going to have a look at that next.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Imagine a home where discipline got results without anyone having to feel bad or in trouble. The Do's and Don'ts of Discipline is a webinar to help parents set limits with love, compassion and humanity. Find it now at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. Tell me, Dr. Justin, what is the science behind giving your children unusual names?
I kind of feel like we've just offended the entire planet today in this podcast. But anyway, here's what we know from research. First of all, you spend forever trying to figure this out, right? I mean, just figuring it out is so difficult. But early studies have found that men with uncommon first names are more likely to drop out of school and more likely to be lonely later in life. And one study found that psychiatric patients who had more unusual names tended to be more disturbed. Here's what else I can tell you. Research evidence tells us that different names are popular among different social classes. And it's the different social classes that have different opportunities and goals. So there's been some research in the UK, there's been some research in the United States. What actually happens here is that a name in some ways sends a signal to society about who you are and where you're from. Now, this really does run the risk from a political point of view of putting us in a situation where we're actually prejudging people, and it's a horrible thing to say. So I want to be really gentle when I say this. When we look at the data, though, and this is some research from a study in 2003, the study was called "Are Emily and Greg More Employable Than Lakeisha and Jamal?" So the two researchers, their names were Marianne Bertrand and Senthil I can't actually pronounce this researcher's surname, but I'm going to try, Mullainathan. They sent nearly 5,000 CVs in response to job advertisements in Chicago and Boston newspapers. CVs are exactly the same, but half were given fake names that sounded like they belonged to white people, like Emily Walsh or Greg Baker. And the other half were given names that sounded African-American, like Lakeisha Washington or Jamal Jones. And the callback rate from employers was 50% higher on the white names than the black names. And this was even found with federal contractors that have got affirmative action policies and companies that said they were equal opportunity employers. If we move even further into this little area of, it's a quagmire really in terms of the prejudice and the things that it can stir up. David Figlio is a researcher at Northwestern University, and he had a look at the scores of 55,000 children in a school district of Florida. And instead of just distinguishing between white and black names, he codified what aspects of names meant that they were more likely to belong to black children and children from low-income families. So he was able to create this sliding scale, which went, for example, from Drew to Dwayne to DeMarcus to Daquan. And so you can see how you're on this scale of these names beginning with D, and they're getting increasingly unusual, increasingly unique, and also increasingly likely to belong to a certain social class or a certain racial background or whatever it might be. And what David Figlio found with this big study was that the further along the scale he went, the worse the school test scores were, the less likely the student was to be recommended for the school's program for gifted students. And in a separate study, he used the same data to show that African-American boys who are given names more common among girls, more likely to develop behavioural problems when they reach puberty. And those problems increase significantly when there are girls in the same year group with the same name. So we can't say for sure that a name is going to highlight a person's chance or otherwise for success in life. And a lot of this stuff is mixed up with race, particularly the American research and also a little bit in the UK. But what all of the research shows, Kylie, is that when you give your kids unique, novel, creative names, it absolutely sets them apart. And the overwhelming majority of the evidence over the last 20 or 30 years is that it sets them apart in ways that we probably wouldn't be pleased about.
When my friend was naming her daughters, she made sure that they had a unisex name because of that very reason. She didn't want them to be putting their resume in and being judged on their capacity based on their gender.
Yeah.
And it's interesting just how powerful an impression our names have without anybody knowing even who we are.
So the moral of the story, the take-home message, we're not going to tell you what to name your kids. That would be inappropriate. But I think that it's really relevant that we just pause and think, if children are coming into the world, how do we want them to be seen by the world? Because they will be seen a certain way. The wrong name can, unfortunately, even in 2022, can lead to kids being bullied and potentially missing out on opportunities, whether it's a work opportunity, a school opportunity, or otherwise. Hey, Kylie, great conversation. Thanks for finding that article and sharing the bogan names. I'm glad we were able to have a bit of a laugh about it, but like I said, there is a bit of a serious side to it, and I think that it's worth spending time on that. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. We are really excited to tell you that on the 24th of March, can we please talk about our boys? It's a free webinar, free webinar, 24th of March, to help you to navigate the challenges of raising boys in what can be a very difficult place for our boys all too often. That's the 24th of March, free webinar. All the details at our Facebook page, Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families, or online at happyfamilies.com.au.